Stop. Before you scroll again, before you click away, before the next behavior runs on autopilot, ask yourself one impossible question. Are you choosing this, or are you just reacting? Think of the last time you got angry, the last time you reached for your phone without thinking, the last time you said yes when you meant no. What if none of it was a decision? What if every move you make, every habit you repeat, every feeling you claim as yours was just a well-reinforced reflex? Behavior analysis doesn't just explain what you do, it questions why you ever believed you were doing it. It proposes something that sounds innocent, but feels radical once it lands. You are not the author of your life. You are its product. And worse, you are programmable. This isn't just psychology, it's a philosophy. A quiet, clinical, devastating philosophy. One that doesn't ask how to help you become your best self, but how you got convinced there was a self in the first place. You see, behavior analysis isn't about what you think. It's about what you do, and more importantly, what made you do it. Today, we're entering a world where freedom is an illusion, where the soul is a conditioned pattern, and where you are not acting on your environment is acting on you. If that scares you, good, because only when you feel that fear do you begin to see what's really shaping your life. Let's begin. You were told you have choices, that every action you take is yours, that freedom is your birthright. But what if that's the most seductive lie you've ever been sold? What if your idea of free will isn't evidence of power, but evidence of a story the world trained you to believe? Behavior analysis begins with a challenge, not to your thoughts, but to your authorship. It tells you your actions aren't created by you. They're selected by reinforcement, triggered by conditions, repeated because they once worked. You didn't choose kindness. You were rewarded for it. You didn't choose to shout. You once avoided something painful by doing it, and now you're doing it again. You call it personality. Behaviorism calls it contingency. Ask yourself, how many things in your life do you call your decision when they're really just your history speaking through you? B.F. Skinner wrote, "A person does not act upon the world acts upon the person." But isn't that terrifying? If that's true, then where are you in all this? The philosopher Spinoza once said, "Men believe themselves free because they are conscious of their actions and ignorant of the causes by which they are determined." Could it be that consciousness is just the afterglow of behavior, not its cause? That your feeling of freedom comes after the choice has already been made by systems you don't see? Have you ever noticed how often you regret a decision and still do it again? Why? Because your environment didn't change, because reinforcement still shaped the outcome, and maybe because you were never the one deciding. Free will in this model isn't a force, it's a placeholder, a name we give to our ignorance of causes, something we invoke when we can't explain our behavior but still want to believe in it. But if all behavior has a cause, if every emotion, every habit, every belief is part of a causal chain, what does that mean for morality, for justice, for accountability? Can we punish someone for a crime if they were shaped into committing it? Or praise someone for virtue if their virtue was conditioned? Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, that without external rules we are responsible for inventing our essence. But what if Skinner is right instead? What if we are conditioned to be predictable, and our essence is written by the contingencies we couldn't escape? Ask yourself honestly, how many of your daily actions feel like choices, and how many feel like scripts? Do you truly choose what you desire, or are you just playing the role life has rehearsed into you? If freedom is real, how would you prove it? And if it's not, what would that mean for how you live? You think you know yourself, but what you know is likely what you've been able to observe. You say you're anxious, but what does that mean? That your hands sweat? That your heart races? Or that someone once told you that's what anxiety looks like? Behavior analysis doesn't care about your story. It cares about your data. It doesn't ask, why do you feel this way? It asks, what happened just before this, and what happens next? This might feel cold, clinical, even, but maybe that's because we've been conditioned to think warmth lives in interpretation, not in precision. We romanticize the invisible, but behaviorism demands we pay attention to what we can see, measure, and replicate. You are not an enigma. You are a pattern. Think of the last time someone said, "I just feel like something's wrong." What did they do next? Did they cry? Did they shut down? Did they lash out? In behaviorism, that feeling isn't the explanation. It's part of the behavior itself. In this view, your private events, your thoughts, feelings, even dreams aren't sacred ground. They're just more behavior. And behavior can be studied. This doesn't mean you don't have an inner world. It means your inner world isn't separate from the systems shaping you. William James once said, "A great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices." Behaviorists would say, "You're not rearranging, you're rehearsing. You're doing what's been reinforced again and again." Ask yourself, when was the last time you changed a belief, not because you were convinced, but because the consequences of keeping it changed? Empiricism isn't just about science, it's a philosophy. It says, if it can't be observed, it doesn't get to rule your life, and that challenges a lot of our favorite illusions. That love can't be explained, that trauma lives in the soul, that identity is something you just know. Behaviorism says, show me. Not because it wants to diminish you, but because it wants to actually reach you. Not your idea of you, but the one that lives in time, in motion, in patterns. Because what we can see, we can shape, and what we can shape, we can change. If that scares you, ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? That you're being reduced to an algorithm? Or that you always were and now you can finally do something with it? You've been told you have a soul, that behind your actions lies a deeper essence, something unknowable, unmeasurable, sacred. But behavior analysis asks a question that seems blasphemous. What if there is no soul? What if everything you do, everything you feel, everything you are, can be explained without invoking something magical? This is the principle of parsimony. The simplest explanation wins. And in this war for understanding the mind, behaviorists go in armed with razors. Why say someone has low self-esteem when we can describe the exact situations where their behavior collapses? Why blame a violent personality when we can track the history of reinforcement that made aggression useful? Every time you say, "That's just how I am," you're giving up. You're naming a ghost instead of mapping a pattern. And behaviorism doesn't believe in ghosts. B.F. Skinner once said, "Why invoke a self when a stimulus will do? But to many, that feels dehumanizing. Don't we need the soul to make life meaningful? Don't we need mystery to protect dignity?" Here's the hard part. Behaviorists aren't trying to erase your humanity. They're trying to make it observable, repeatable, intervenable. The soul might feel sacred, but if it can't be tested, it can't be helped. And if it can't be helped, what are we clinging to? Freud gave us a psyche full of hidden drives. Jung gave us archetypes and symbols. But behaviorism gives us something else. A scalpel. It cuts through the fog of metaphor to reveal the actual conditions that shaped you. Not why you dreamed of drowning, but what happened the next morning. Not what your repressed desires mean, but what behaviors they predict. You don't need an unconscious. You need a contingency map. And while this may feel like a loss of depth, it may also be a recovery of control. Because as long as your behavior is haunted by invisible forces, you can't change them. But if it's just a pattern, then it's yours to modify. Ask yourself, are you more than your actions? Or are your actions all there ever was? Does parsimony strip life of its meaning, or does it finally let us touch it? We grow up believing that truth is something eternal, that behind every question lies a single correct answer, waiting to be uncovered like a fossil in stone. But behavior analysis doesn't ask what is true, it asks what works. It doesn't care if your belief is beautiful, it only asks if it changes your behavior. This is where it joins hands with pragmatism. William James once wrote, "Truth is what happens to an idea." In other words, truth is not discovered, it is tested, it is used, and if it helps us predict and control experience, we keep it. If not, we discard it, no matter how sacred it feels. Behaviorism doesn't wonder whether the mind exists. It wonders whether positing a mind helps us shape behavior. If it doesn't, we move on. In this light, your identity isn't something to be understood, it's something to be engineered. Your thoughts, not maps of inner terrain, but tools. They either produce results, or they don't. Think about your most deeply held beliefs, not just religious or political, but personal. I am unlovable, I am meant for more. On change, ask yourself, are they true, or are they just useful? Or worse, are they only useful in keeping you stuck? Behavior analysis redefines truth away from abstraction and into contingency. It says, the value of an idea is in its consequences. We don't pursue meaning because it's noble, we pursue it because it reinforces behavior. Even morality in this view is pragmatic. Not good because of divine order, but good because it increases cooperation. Justice is only true if it makes people act better. That's not cynical. It's empirical. It asks what behavior survives and what behavior reshapes the world. But doesn't that make truth shallow? If all we care about is effect, don't we risk manipulating people with lies that work? Here's the counterpoint. Lies stop working. Over time, contingencies change. Behavior fails. Truth, in this framework, is what works in the long term, what sustains, what survives the feedback loop of cause and effect. Maybe that's the only kind of truth we can ever really trust. Ask yourself, what do you believe not because it's proven, but because it's persuasive? What do you defend, not because it's accurate, but because it keeps your world from collapsing? And if that's what your truth depends on, was it ever true to begin with? You think you act because you want to, because something inside you sparks and says, go. But behavior analysis says, maybe that spark is just the afterglow of reinforcement. Maybe what you call motivation is just history echoing through your nervous system. You weren't born with the desire to succeed, to help, to escape, or to fight. Those were learned, selected, shaped. Like a species adapting to its ecosystem, your behaviors evolve, not because they were noble, but because they worked. Darwin gave us evolution, Skinner gave us contingencies. Both say the same thing, the environment selects. So when you say, I felt motivated, a behaviorist asks, when did that feeling first produce a result? Because in this framework, feelings are not causes, they are side effects. You believe you're hungry, so you eat. But maybe you see food, so hunger arrives. The mind is constantly justifying behaviors after the fact, and we call that justification a self. Ask yourself, how many times have you said, I want to stop, but kept going? How many times have you waited for motivation that never came, while still doing the thing anyway? If you needed motivation, you wouldn't have moved. So why did you? Because your behavior was already selected, already reinforced. And that's the myth exposed. Motivation isn't fuel, it's a story. It's how we narrate the momentum already in motion. Think about it. Have you ever met someone motivated who didn't have some form of consistent reinforcement behind them? Rewards, avoidance of pain, social status, internal relief. It's never magic, it's mechanics. Skinner once said, a person who has been punished is not less inclined to behave in a given way. At best, he learns how to avoid punishment. You don't grow from suffering, you grow from successful escape. If you're proud of your drive, your ambition, your willpower, look closer. When were those behaviors rewarded? When did doing more get you more? And when it didn't, did your drive remain, or did it wither? Selectionism means this. What you call your nature was cultivated. What you think is your identity is your reinforcement history. That may sound disempowering, but it's not. Because if you are shaped, then you can be reshaped. You are not the source of your behavior, but you are the site of its redesign. Ask yourself, if your life is a system of reinforcements, what are you reinforcing now? And what patterns are you feeding, repeating, passing on? And if you could change the conditions, what kind of behavior might evolve in you next? You were taught that morality is sacred, that good and evil are written into the fabric of the universe, that justice is not just a word but a force, objective, real, binding. But behavior analysis asks a disturbing question. What if morality is just reinforcement? What if justice is not discovered, but programmed? In a world built on contingencies, what we call right and wrong may not be divine principles, but socially conditioned reflexes. You were punished for lying, rewarded for sharing, shaped to see fairness as noble and cruelty as vile. But what if those values weren't chosen, only reinforced? Kant believed in a categorical imperative, a moral law dictated by reason itself. Skinner believed in patterns, and for behaviorists, morality is not a compass, it's a contingency map. Ask yourself, do you help others because it's good, or because helping has been rewarded, socially, emotionally, biologically? If that reinforcement were removed, would the goodness remain? Behavior analysis doesn't deny moral feelings, it just asks where they come from. If guilt is a learned response, then even your conscience is a history. And if shame can be shaped, can it be erased? That's the ethical void. When morality becomes a behavior, it becomes modifiable. And what can be modified can be manipulated. Think about propaganda, indoctrination, culture wars. What if they aren't corrupting our values but simply reconditioning them? If society can reward obedience and punish dissent, who decides which values survive? And if values are contingent, does evil still exist? Or is evil just behavior we've been trained to punish? Spinoza once said, good and evil are nothing more than emotions of pleasure or pain, which follow from the virtue or vice of action. What we call evil may simply be aversive consequence. But if that's true, what happens to responsibility? Can someone be blamed for behavior they were conditioned into? Can a criminal be punished if his actions were the inevitable product of reinforcement histories? Behavior analysis says, maybe not. But it also says something more radical. You can still shape better behavior, not through judgment, through design. You are not morally free. You are morally engineered. And that's not despair, that's possibility. Ask yourself, what if justice wasn't a destination but a protocol? What if ethics was not a truth but a tool? And if we could redesign our reinforcements, could we redesign what we call good? You think there's a you behind your actions, a thinker behind your thoughts, a self behind your sentences. But behavior analysis says maybe the self is just another behavior. Maybe I is a word you learned to say when certain conditions were met, a label you repeat because it was once reinforced, not a soul, not a center, just a pattern. Sartre believed we invent ourselves through choice, that we are condemned to create meaning in a meaningless world. But Skinner would argue there is no inventor, only invention. The self doesn't precede behavior, it follows it. You do something and then language explains it. That explanation gets rewarded, and over time it hardens into identity. Ask yourself, when did you first start calling yourself anxious, or ambitious, or broken? Did you choose those labels, or were they echoed back to you so many times you stopped questioning them? Behaviorism says the self is not an entity, it's a repertoire, a collection of verbal behaviors under the stimulus control of context. I am is not a revelation. It's a response, and like any response, it can be shaped. Think about how you describe yourself. Are those descriptions objective truths, or just the stories that survived reinforcement? Nietzsche said there are no facts, only interpretations. But Skinner goes further. Interpretations themselves are shaped. If your sense of self is a narrative, who rewarded the chapters you kept, and who punished the pages you tore out? Every I you speak is a social performance, a reinforced script. You are not the author of that script. You're just the actor who memorized it best. Does that mean there's no core you? Not necessarily, but it means the core might be smaller than you think and far more malleable. Ask yourself, if you grew up in a different culture, with different reinforcers, how different would you be? If your story had different feedback, would you even recognize the protagonist? Behavior analysis says probably not, because you are not the cause of your behavior, you are its echo, a refined product of selective pressures, social cues, and reinforcement schedules. That's not fatalism, that's freedom redefined, because if the self is shaped, then it can be reshaped. If identity is conditioned, then it can be reconditioned. Ask yourself, who would you be if no one had ever told you who you were? Maybe you're not free. Maybe everything you do, every decision, every desire, is the result of reinforcement histories and environmental conditions. Maybe you are not choosing, just reacting. But if that's true, where does that leave you? Behavior analysis doesn't offer a fairy tale, it offers a confrontation. It says, you may not control your behavior from some inner throne, but you can control the contingencies. You can't change what you are, but you can change what you are becoming. Most people hear that and panic. They ask, if I'm not free, then who's responsible? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better one is, if I understand the variables shaping me, can I use them to reshape myself? In this view, freedom isn't a state, it's a skill. It's not something you are born with, it's something you engineer. Sartre said we are condemned to be free. Behaviorism says we are conditioned to be repeatable. But maybe both are right, in different ways. You didn't choose your history, but you can choose the systems that influence your next behavior, and that's the paradox. The more you understand how unfree you are, the more precisely you can begin to design your life. Ask yourself, what environments reinforce the version of you you claim to want? What contingencies are keeping the worst parts alive? What do you reward in yourself without realizing it? What behaviors do you punish with shame but continue to feed with attention? B.F. Skinner wrote, "We shouldn't teach great books, we should teach a love of reading. Knowledge is not enough, we have to teach a behavior." So, ask yourself, what kind of behaviors are you cultivating not by what you believe, but by what you repeat? Because beliefs don't shape the future, behaviors do. And behaviors can be built. That's the final challenge. Not to defend free will, but to build a system where good behavior becomes inevitable. Not to deny responsibility, but to understand it as a feedback loop. You are not the origin of your actions, but you are the designer of their conditions. And if that's true, then you still have a choice. Not in the metaphysical sense, not in the soul-deep, universe-approved, individual sovereignty kind of way, but in the behavioral sense. You can choose your reinforcers, you can choose your consequences, and through them, you can choose who you will become. So ask yourself, if you can't choose where your story started, can you choose how it ends?